So we should have folks coming in now. Welcome as you come into the room. We'll just give it another minute or so to give everyone time to jump on. But in the meantime, please feel free to use our chat box to introduce yourself, maybe say where you're calling in from, and we'll just get started in a minute's time. And you can also see we've got Manjot, who's with our fantastic ACF team here tonight, calling in from Central Coast of New South Wales. And she'll be there in the chat to help you out with anything. Please feel free to converse in there. Just give it one more minute. Welcome everyone who's joining to Where Does Your Bank Rank on Climate? Very much looking forward to this hour with you all. We've got 76 folks on the line already, and that number is going up very quickly. Thank you all for joining on your Thursday evening. All right, I reckon it's 7:01. I can see everyone's being nice and prompt, so let's get started. Welcome everyone who's joined and is just joining at the moment. My name is Phoebe and I'll be your host for the evening. I'm part of the ACF community and mobilisation team and really excited to be here with you all for Where Does Your Bank Rank on Climate? I do just want to quickly mention, like a lot of folks, I am still in a working from home setup. So I do have my notes up on a separate screen, and my apologies if I'm looking past you all. I'm sure there is a lot of empathy from working from home situations at the moment. Before we do kick off, I just want to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from Wurundjeri country. This is unceded land. Sovereignty was never ceded over this country by its First Peoples. And pay my respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be on the call with us today. I also, just on that note, want to acknowledge that we're here tonight to talk about the power of money and about using money for good. And if you haven't yet heard of the Pay the Rent program, I just want to flag that. It's a fund that supports First Nations-led initiatives that benefit community, led by and fully managed by First Nations people. And if you are thinking about how to use your money to support First Nations justice, please take a look at Pay the Rent. So just a little bit of admin first up, and actually I can see quite a few of you are already acknowledging country in the chat. Please do feel free to take a moment to do that and let us know what lands you're calling in from. So just a couple of admin points. We do have a couple of ways for you to converse tonight, get involved in the conversation tonight. I can see a lot of you are already using the chat function, which is fantastic. So for general conversation, chatting with one another, introducing yourself, please do use the chat. But if you do have a specific question for one of our speakers, Joel or May, please do go to the Q&A function, which you can find next to the chat. And that will allow you to put forward a question, which we can ask of our speakers. And just a quick reminder to please keep the conversation polite and thoughtful, make space for others, and we can make this a really beautiful hour and productive hour for us all. So tonight we do have two fantastic speakers lined up for you. First, you're going to be hearing from May, who is our ACF economic analyst and campaigner. She's going to talk to you about the banks, how they rank on climate, and our campaign to get them out of gas. You'll also be hearing from Joel, who is ACF's community and mobilisation manager. He's going to take you through the collective call to action that we have to engage the banks on gas and how you can get involved. And after both May's and Joel's section, we're going to have time for the Q&A, so your questions. So please do put them through in the Q&A function and we will come to them after May and Joel have done their presentations each. I'd also just like to do a bit of a shout out to anyone who might not have been connected to ACF for very long yet, or someone who is totally new to the Australian Conservation Foundation. Welcome. It's fantastic to have you here. So ACF is Australia's national environment organisation, and we have four big interconnected goals. So we want to solve the climate crisis, revitalise our democracy, protect nature, and transform our economy. And before we continue, I do just want to recognise that all the work we do here at ACF, including events like this one that you're in here tonight, is made possible because of our generous donors and the support of our community. You're really the heart of our work, and I just want to extend my thanks and acknowledgement for all that you do. And so, intro's done. Let's jump right into it. I want to kick us off by bringing May in. May is our economic analyst and campaigner. And May, first question for you tonight. What is ACF doing to solve the climate crisis, and especially right now as we come out of COVID?
Thanks, Phoebe, and hello to everybody on the call. It's great to be with you this evening. So the climate crisis is here and now. We're seeing it firsthand as we've seen extreme bushfires, we've seen drought, and we've seen extreme flooding. But there's a lot that we can do to solve this issue. And here at ACF, the actions that we're taking are at this moment, at this critical point that we're in as we rebuild from COVID, we have the choice to either recover and build back better or continue on as business as usual. So what we really want to see is Australia recovering, rebuilding and renewing. And we want to make sure that our government choices fund our future. We don't want them to be put into gas. We also want to make sure that we're converting our energy system from high polluting and old fossil fuels of the 20th century into clean and renewable power, and making sure that Australia can be a clean energy superpower and export that to the nation and other nations. But there's a really key critical role that banks can play in helping this transition into a renewable energy superpower. And that's by making sure that their money is financing the climate crisis, not financing the climate crisis, but financing
Definitely not financing. We don't want that.
No. So as we recover, rebuild and renew, we need to continue the trajectory about getting away from thermal coal and moving into renewable energies. But as we make sure that we're shifting in that critical juncture, we don't want to go down the track of gas. We know it's a fossil fuel. We know it's bad. And what we know is that gas has a component called methane in it, which is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide in the short term. And the United Nations Environment Programme has said that with the amount of gas that's being produced and planned, we're going to overshoot the 1.5 degree pathway by 70% in 2030. So it's really vital that we're making sure our money is fueling renewable energies and clean climate solutions and not gas.
So that's a pretty clear message there, May. We need to end extracting and burning gas if we're going to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So where do the banks fit in? What's their role in ending Australia's reliance on gas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to check, I can see in the chat that my audio is going in and out. Can everybody hear me correctly?
Just I can hear you okay, but there's just a question there from the audience to raise your volume. Maybe if you could move your mic a little bit. And
okay.
Yes, and there's a comment there from Ashley. Thank you, Ashley, that you sound a bit better there.
Fantastic.
Everyone, thanks so much for using the chat. Please do post again if you're having troubles hearing any of us. It's really helpful.
Great. Okay. Well, going back to your question, Phoebe, about how the banks have power to shift and transform our economy. Banks are a huge influence over where money goes and particularly which big projects can progress and which ones will be deemed a little bit too risky that they shouldn't be funding. So the way the banks finance the gas industry at the moment, they can either provide project financing to projects like Beetaloo Basin, and they'll provide funding that way, or they can provide corporate financing to big gas companies like Woodside and Santos. And as the money flows from the banks to those companies and those projects, that increases the gas industry and increases Australia's emissions. But what we can see is when the banks stop funding gas projects and commit to stop funding gas companies, there's no longer any money. So those companies can't continue with these destructive climate wrecking projects. And the gas industry shrinks, which sends a ripple effect through the economy and sends a message that we can no longer continue down this path of destructive fossil fuel funding.
Thanks for that, May. So I'll just quickly pause and remind people to please use the Q&A function. If anything that May says prompts questions for you, we will come to those shortly, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we can in the time that we have tonight. So next question for you, May. Can you tell us a bit about how Australia's four big banks rank on gas investment? And do you know anything about their plans to move their money out of this aging fossil fuel that harms our climate?
Look, I do, and I've got some information for you that I
That
can
does
tell
not
just
surprise
between
me.
our
Thank
friends.
you.
But what I can tell you is that the big four banks are all still heavily invested in gas. You'll see here a bit of a sliding scale about what their investments look like in oil and gas extraction. And I just want to make this really clear very quickly that this is only oil and gas extraction. So we're thinking LNG projects, fracking projects, but we're not where that doesn't include the pipelines that support the transport of gas. And it also doesn't include how much money is being invested into the burning of gas. So these numbers that we see here, and this is publicly available information, it could actually be a lot higher. So this is what we know. Westpac in 2019 loaned $110 million to Woodside Energy, who has a number of major gas projects over in WA. But that's in total, they're only financing $2.22 billion to oil and gas extraction. That doesn't seem like a lot when you say 2.22, but I've got to remind you that there's lots and lots of zeros behind that as well. As we slide down, we can see that CBA, they recently loaned $693 million to a coal seam gas project in Queensland alone. And that's pretty staggering, that amount of money. ANZ, on the other hand, had $8.2 billion invested in oil and gas extraction. And you can see that that outnumbers what the other big four banks have there. In fact, with Westpac, NAB, and CBA, they're all kind of staying stagnant around their investments in oil and gas extraction. ANZ is actually increasing it. Since 2017, they've increased their investments by a whopping 17%. This is huge. And so here's a little bit of secret information that I have for you. NAB and Westpac are excitingly currently reviewing their gas and oil policies. And that's looking to come out sometime in around September, we think, maybe June, September. So now's a really critical moment to make sure that their funding stops when it comes to gas. And here's something else that I know. When we've talked to some of the banks, we've heard that they really want to be at the forefront of stopping the climate crisis, and they want to be leaders in this field. And they've said to us, we want to walk the walk, we don't want to just talk the talk. So we know that if one of the banks wants to get out of gas, this is going to start a ripple effect with all the other banks. So it's a really key moment to be making sure we're shifting the conversation around gas.
So, May, it feels like a bit of an understatement to just sum up and say that is a lot of money there, with some encouraging insights from you too about the situation of where the banks are standing on their investment in gas. So how do we influence them? How do we get them to walk that talk and get them to get out of gas as soon as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of levers and a lot of opportunities to influence the banks. And I just kind of want to talk about the stakeholders for a second and how these stakeholders can influence the banks. So you can see on this PowerPoint slide here that there are employees, customers, and the community and shareholders. So that's people like you and I, Phoebe, and everybody else that's on this call here. We all have a really big, powerful influence over the banks through our customer relationship, whether or not we work there, whether or not we invest, we have different levels of power, or even if we're just part of the community, the banks listen and the banks care. But they also listen to regulators and governments. And so what we know in terms of the regulators, we're talking here the ASIC and we're talking APRA. And they're starting to move on climate and they're starting to push the banks, particularly to analyze what they're doing in respect of funding and climate risks, whereas the government, on the other hand, are a little bit slower in this respect. So the government has recently put out an inquiry into the way that the banks are funding fossil fuels with the view to get them to reverse their commitments to exit out of thermal coal and, not make any new commitments to divest from gas.
Hey, May, I've just seen a post that you've gone a little bit quiet again, so maybe just bring that mic in.
Oh, I hope you can hear me now.
I think
Perfect.
that's better,
Great.
but our audience will keep letting us know if May drops out.
Yeah, please do. And so as the government runs this inquiry, it's really important that the banks are hearing from their other stakeholders, particularly the community, the shareholders, the customers and employees, that they want the banks to exit from gas and that divestment is fundamental and it's important in solving the climate crisis. And we've seen this work before in a number of campaigns. Let's talk about thermal coal as a really clear analogous circumstance to gas. CBA, the Commonwealth Bank, was the first of the big four banks to get out of thermal coal. And they did it because a bunch of people got together and rallied from the community against the bank's investments in Adani. When they saw that, Commonwealth Bank said, well, we don't want to fund any thermal coal, so we're going to get out. And that started a ripple effect. Then we saw NAB make a commitment to get out of thermal coal by 2035. And then there were other people-powered campaigns. So we ran a people-powered campaign last year around Westpac and ANZ to get them to come out of thermal coal. And we started that in March. And by May, Westpac had committed to get out, which was incredible. And then towards the end of last year, ANZ also made a commitment to exit thermal coal projects by 2030. So we've seen some really big wins in this space. We've also seen People Power win amazing campaigns with the Business Council of Australia. Now, they were an industry group that were representing a bunch of businesses, and they were really stopping climate action at a government level. But through People Power engaging with some of the Business Council's members like Woolworths and Coles and Woolworths questioned the Business Council on their climate policies, and we saw them actually become a really big advocate for an economy-wide net zero emissions transition, which was a great win. We've seen other wins with UniSuper, which is an Australian super fund, who have recently divested from a small group of coal mining companies. And that was because a bunch of members of the fund got together, started having conversations with the executive team. They rallied, I think, 10,000 members in total. And that number really pushed UniSuper to commit to net zero and divest from thermal coal companies. And finally, a really big one, if you've seen it overseas, BlackRock is a major investor. It's the world's largest investor, actually. And they recently, I think in 2019 or 2020, announced that they were going to cut investments in major thermal coal companies. But that wasn't just because they felt like it. There was actually a long, sustained campaign by individuals writing into BlackRock, engaging with them through their phone line, standing outside their offices, calling on BlackRock to cut their connections with thermal coal companies. So we've seen some really amazing campaigns being won by People Power, and we know that we can do this again when it comes to the big banks and gas.
There's definitely some pretty encouraging precedents there for the work that we're all doing. And so before we open up to questions, May, can you just tell us a bit about what ACF's strategy is and how people can get involved in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, Westpac and NAB are now considering their gas and oil policies, and there's going to be about 6 months until a new policy is finalised and comes out. So this is a really critical moment for us as a community and as a collective to raise the profile of gas. And so over that time period, we at ACF, and with your help and with the community, want to rally together and start telling the banks that they need to step out of gas and need to move to funding climate solutions. So we've got a lot of exciting activities planned over the next 6 months, but the first one that we want to take with you is calling up each of the banks that you're connected with and telling them why you don't want to see your bank fund any more gas companies or any more gas projects, and why you want it to see them move to a climate safe future for you, your friends, and for the environment.
Fantastic. Thank you, May. We're going to go to some questions in just a minute. Before we do, I just want to quickly flag a tiny piece of admin that I forgot to tell our wonderful community at the start. There's always something. Some of you may have noticed that we are recording this session. This is just for anyone who couldn't make it along tonight, or any of you that may want to listen to this again. So that's why you'll see that this session is recording, and I just wanted to flag that to you all. But thank you so much for that overview, May. I feel like my head is a lot fuller with information after that, and I'm sure everyone else's is. I see we've got some questions through in the Q&A, and I would like to introduce Isabella Moran, who's our mobilisation coordinator, to ask some of the community's questions of you, May.
Thanks so much, Phoebe, and thanks, May, for that great presentation. And hi, everyone. It's been really interesting seeing your questions come through. May, firstly, I'd love to hear more about how you've managed to get some of this information. You mentioned the banks are notorious for not being very transparent. That was a question from Azra.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Azra. So we have spent a bit of time going through the data. We've looked through their annual reports. We've collaborated with our friends at Market Forces and got a bit of information through their mechanisms. But we also have really good relationships with the banks, and we've been talking with them, and they've shared a little bit about their strategy, but not a lot. They've told us what they can tell us, and that's essentially that they want to act on climate and they want to do what's in the best interest of the country. So we know from that we need to be making sure that they're hearing the voices of the community and taking the best actions that they can to be getting out of gas.
That's great to hear, and I think people would be really interested in hearing a little bit more about that relationship. There was a question from Vera about how we can hold banks to account on that original commitment around exiting thermal coal by 2030.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we progress on this campaign, obviously we're asking the banks to get out of gas, but it's still really important that they stick to their commitments. So we'll be continuing to liaise with the executives at the banks and the CSR or the ESG, and that's, sorry to say acronyms, I'll say that, the corporate social responsibility or the environment social governance managers, around what they're actually funding. And we'll be getting information and talking to them about that and keeping them to account on their current commitments. We hope not. I absolutely hope that we do not see them fund any more thermal coal, because that would be backtracking on their commitments. But as soon as they do, like this campaign raising the profile of gas, people can come together and people will hold the banks to account, and we'll make sure that the banks know that they can't slip any thermal coal investments under the rug as well.
Nice, thank you. There's been a few questions here about smaller banks and what we know about their investments, and also questions from people who want to leave the big banks because of this funding polluting industries. I wonder what you could say about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, firstly, let me say the most important way that we can make systemic change is to collectively hold the banks to account. And that's using your power as a customer. You have a really strong relationship with the bank. Or even if you're an investor or a shareholder, you also have power and great influence over the banks themselves that way. And it's really important that before making a shift, we hold them to account, we raise the profile of gas, and we let them know that the banks need to make this step. Because as the funders of major projects around Australia, and the ones with the biggest investments and biggest money in them, the big four banks can make systemic change in the economy. That's not to say, however, that other banks don't have influence. And if you have made those steps and have held your bank to account and still want to change banks, there are a range of smaller banks that might not be invested in gas. And Market Forces do have a good ranking system on what that looks like. I do think it's in thermal coal. I'm not sure what the policies are with respect to gas, but you can have a look there.
So
That's
Isabel and
great.
May, we've probably got time for one more question, and then if we have more time at the end, we can do a few more.
Great, thank you, Phoebe. And I was just going to say, Manjot will put a link to that information about the other banks in the chat. But I'd also encourage people, if you're not sure, if you're with a smaller bank and you don't know their investments in gas, feel free to give them a call and ask, and see what information you can get as a customer, and also feel free to let us know what they have to say about that. Okay, one more question. So, okay, there's a nice positive one here to end on, which is how much are the banks investing into renewable energy, and what could we see them doing as an alternative to these big fossil fuel investments?
We love a good positive question. I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head, but what I do know is that the bank's investments in renewable energies are increasing, and that's great. The banks are funding good things, and we need to see them funding more great positive solutions like solar power, like wind, like big batteries. It's really fundamental that to make a shift to a clean energy system, they divest from gas and shift into renewable energies like that. But there are also other big climate solutions that they can be funding, and that includes electrification. It also includes for industry, and it also includes powering EVs. There's also other opportunities like sustainable agriculture, and making sure that the companies that they're funding have strong emissions reduction plans that are aligned with net zero emissions and the Paris Agreement. So that's a little bit of information. I hope that it has answered all of the questions, but please feel free to keep asking some in the chat, and I will definitely get to them if there's a point to do so.
Perfect. Thank you so much, May, and thank you, Isab. And just acknowledging that this conversation does not end with this hour that we all have together. This is a piece of work that needs our time and energy ongoing, and we're really excited to be working with you, and we will continue these conversations. So before I bring in our Community and Mobilisation Coordinator, Joel, I just wanted to do a couple of, again, quick admin reminders. Who doesn't love those? Just in the chat, you'll see that you have a couple of options for putting a message in there. One is to all panellists, which is the people you can see on your screen. But if you want all the other community members to see your message, please make sure you select all panellists and attendees, and everyone will see what you're saying. And the other quick thing is, if you'd like to get the recording of this webinar, please send us an email, contact us at acf.org.au, and we will send it out to you. So thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. We'll wrap up there for now, but let's keep this chat going. And I would now like to welcome Joel, our Community and Mobilisation Manager. Joel's going to talk us through how we kick off this campaign to get the banks out of gas. And remember to put your questions for Joel in the Q&A.
Thank you, Phoebe, and hi everyone. It's always such a pleasure to be rocking up to a webinar like this and seeing more than 100 people coming together to work out how we can take even more action to help solve the climate crisis. So it's a pleasure working with you all tonight, and I'm looking forward to talking about this action that we're launching tonight. So I'm really excited about this campaign. It's really important, it's really ambitious, and it has a broad appeal, I think, to get lots of different people involved in calling for climate action. As May outlined, the banks listen to people and particularly their customers, and they are prepared to shift on climate if enough people speak out persistently over a period of time. So to make this happen, we need to start speaking out and keep speaking out for the next few months. We have plans to reach new audiences, bank decision makers, and escalate our demands to the people that can really make this happen, just in the way that it's happened with setting those exit dates around coal. But first, we need to grab the bank's attention and make our demands clear. Get out of gas. So we're kicking off by calling the banks, contacting them directly by phone and having that conversation with a staff member to request that they log our message. and action that internal process that each bank has, so that each time we call, they have something to do to address our demands and escalate that to the higher ups in the corporation. So with all of us calling, the banks will quickly realise that there is community demand for action on gas. Big banks out of gas, it sounds pretty good to me. It all starts with each person on this call tonight speaking up for our climate and making that call to the bank that you bank with, or all 4 of the banks. If you've got the time and capacity, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Joel. It's always very energizing hearing you talk about this work. So it's pretty clear that we need to get our message to the banks and then keep up that communication to create change. But can you tell us a bit more about why specifically we're calling the banks? Why phone calls?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And I'll just share a couple of slides to take us through this section as well. So essentially, most calls that the banks get are about, bank matters like loans, credit cards, customer service, all that kind of thing, regular banking help. So when a couple of us started calling the banks over the last couple of weeks to really get a sense of the reception that we would get from doing this, 2 different staff members, one from ANZ and one from NAB, both mentioned that was the first time that they had ever received a call about climate change. And they were also both really interested in what the bank that they worked for was actually doing about fossil fuel divestment. So it means, firstly, that making calls really stands out. We can really actually, with even not that many of us, start making a bit of an impact internally in the organisation. And it's that big difference between, I think, sending an email and having that one-on-one conversation with a staff member that can really make the difference here in elevating this issue internally at the organisation. So every call we make reaches a new staff member. They're possibly going to be quite sympathetic to this issue. We know the vast majority of Australians want more action on climate change. So the likelihood is that you're going to be speaking to someone who's really on the same page about this with you. So this can increase the number of questions that are being asked internally. So if staff have ground to stand on that they're getting calls from the public about this, then there's more likelihood that they're willing to speak up when these issues can come up internally as well. So other benefits of calls are that each call is logged. So every bank has their own process for following through with each call that they get. So they're going to have to notice, they have to action something as a result of the call that we do. So they're likely to get the attention of sustainability teams, corporate and social responsibility teams that have a lot of responsibility at the banks to alert them to this demand that is emerging as we all join together in making these calls. And of course, calls need to be answered. So unlike maybe a mass email campaign or something like that, you're there with that other human being that needs to interact with you about this. So there's a real onus on the bank to respond to each and every one of us directly there in the call, and also if we ask for follow-up. And I want to share with you my experience earlier this week when I called Commonwealth Bank. The staff member that I spoke to actually thanked me for calling. They really went above and beyond to help me work out the best way to escalate that demand. She logged my request actually as a complaint so that it would be addressed fairly quickly. And she's promised me an email response within the next week or two from the corporate and social responsibility team there at Commonwealth Bank. So I was actually really surprised by her enthusiasm. She was like, oh, we need more people talking about these issues to the big companies and all this kind of thing. And now while she might have been a bit of an outlier, we'll find out as more and more of us call, she was particularly enthusiastic. I think it's really clear that the last years, decades, I'm sure there are people on the call tonight who have been involved in climate and environmental movements for a very long time. There is huge cultural shift constantly underfoot. And I think that even if I compare my experience from a couple of years ago, doing some actions at banks with the Stop Adani campaign to try and get them to rule out funding that coal mine, it seems there is an ever growing momentum across the community, including staff at the banks, for wanting to see climate action. So it's very exciting.
It's amazing, Joel, isn't it? Just that power of a human to human conversation. There's a lot of strength in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of good reasons that you've just outlined for us to be calling the big four banks. But let's go to some practicalities. How do people actually make this call? And is it as simple as just dialing a number and then asking your bank to exit gas? What do you do?
You know what? It's funny you say that, because it kind of is, in a way. There's a little bit more to it than that, but yeah, that's pretty much the essence of it. So you know, we've compiled some really great information that you've got laid out on pages on our website that you can really just follow this instructions step by step. But essentially, just at a glance, each bank kind of has slightly different hours in their call centers to be open. So just check before you pick up the phone, just to make sure that they're open. So for example, you know, you can see there that CommBank are open 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and that's every day of the week. So that's also on the weekend. So so you've got a lot of options there to make a call. Every bank has a different number, so you'll just want to make sure that you're calling the right number there. Again, that's on the landing page that we'll be sending you as a toolkit. And each bank has their own kind of like number prompts that you have to go through. So you'll obviously be talking to a robot first when you start your call, and there'll be a series of prompts. And our wonderful teammate Lawrence has gone through and actually called each of the banks and really put the numbers that you need to press in order to get put onto someone as quickly as possible on that landing page as well. So all those instructions are there for you when you're ready to call. Now, of course, there is wait time once you're put in the queue. And I think we've all experienced long waits on the phone. So if you have any ideas for what we can do while we're waiting, any maybe things others might thought about, things to do while you're on hold, we'd love to hear some in the chat. So please feel free to throw any creative ideas in there. I usually like to go and make a cuppa and then, I don't know, stare out the window, but maybe there's some better ideas that can come through. Now, while you wait to, you know, you could, you know, do things like have a little bit of you could do a drawing of something beautiful that inspires you about taking action on climate action, or I'm looking forward to seeing some more creative ideas come through in the chat. But a big tip is that when you call during the day can make a big difference to your waiting time. So if you call, for example, really early on in the morning when they're first opening, or quite a bit later towards their closing time, it's more likely that you're able to get through a little bit quicker. And some banks also have a callback service. So for example, I called Commonwealth Bank today. The robot told me that it was over 30 minutes wait for a call. They said, press 1 to get a call back when we're ready for you in the queue. So I pressed 1, got on with the rest of my day, and then my phone rang and I got to speak to that lovely person at CommBank who was there today.
Perfect. Thanks, Joel. I can see folks are putting their answers in the chat about what you do while you're waiting on hold. I would probably be off reading a good book because there's never enough time for reading. So please keep putting your comments in there as to what you would do while you're on hold. Now, once people get put through to the bank, you know, they've gotten that call back or they've gotten through the first time they ring, what exactly should they be saying to the person they get through to?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of tips that we'll go through in terms of this conversation. It can be very simple and quick if you want it to be. There's really this is about conveying your demand as a member of the community and as a customer or a shareholder, if that's your relationship with the bank, for them to set an exit date for getting out of gas. So a couple of tips. Firstly, if you are a customer or a shareholder, definitely let them know. So I'll be calling the other banks as well as part of this campaign, but it's unlikely they'll get the kind of treatment that I got because I am a customer of CommBank. So they really took on my my comments and are going to follow up with me there. So firstly, it kind of goes without saying, but don't forget to be polite. The person on the other end of the phone there, of course, is not the person who dictates the policies about climate for the bank. So you want to win them over. And as we mentioned earlier, you know, it's quite likely that they might also be on side. And be personal. So don't forget to, you know, it's climate and you know, it can become very scientific, especially when we're talking about emissions targets and, you know, dollar values of investments in gas. But remember to bring it back to the things that are really important. Why do you personally care about this issue? What is deeply concerning to you about the climate crisis? That's obviously a really important thing to help set the framing, but also to connect with another person, because it's likely that someone's going to share that view with you. Start with something positive. So we're, as May mentioned earlier, we're in a really great position where we can give the banks a little bit of a pat on the back for setting exit dates for coal investments. So there's fertile ground to build upon when you have this conversation. So we recommend, and these tips are included on that landing page that you'll get as well. We'll follow up by email. But to start with something positive. So for example, today I was saying, yeah, I reckon it's great that you've set a coal exit date. And then that gets us to the next point of requesting that the bank be the first Big Four bank to exit gas. You can then request to have your message passed on. Again, we've got a bit more information for you about the people that are kind of the portfolio holders for the decision making around how a bank would go about taking a stand on an issue like this on moral grounds. So that, corporate responsibility person or team or the sustainability team. So each bank has a different kind of person or team that's relevant, and that's also outlined for you there. So make sure you ask to have that message passed on, because it's really important that there's an action from the bank's perspective there, and then let us know that you've called. So that's a really important part of the process that we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute at the end.
All right, so Joel, I think this is you and Isab doing a bit of a role play of what a call looks like.
That's right. So role plays can always be a little bit awkward, so please bear with us as we get through. But I think it's a good way to get yourself a sense of what to expect. Just for reference, I'm going to be using this page here on our website that you will all attend. You'll all receive. But this is the little call guide. So I've got this up on the screen in front of me while we're having the conversation. And Isab is going to be the person. So I'll start with the ring ring.
Hello, this is Isabella speaking. You've called NAB.
Hi there. My name is Joel. I'm just calling because I'd like to have a conversation with someone about climate change and what NAB is doing about it.
Okay, sure. I think I can have that chat with you.
Beautiful. Oh, thanks so much. So yeah, I possibly like yourself, climate change is a big issue that I really care about and really concerns me about not just the future, but also kind of the present impacts of it. I have been doing a little bit of research into the different things that I can be doing to look at, how I can advocate for carbon emissions to be cut and the kind of action that we need to address the climate crisis. And I wanted to call to talk to you about NAB's investments in gas. So I've recently done a bit of research and found that on coal, NAB has been really great in divesting and announcing a date in which it's going to withdraw its investments from coal projects. But I'm wondering if there's something in the works about that for gas as well, given that burning gas is also really contributing significantly to climate change. And I've seen that you've got about $2 billion invested in gas and oil and no plans yet to get out of that. So I'm just wondering if you've got any information for me about when NAB will be out of gas.
Okay, wow, you've sure done your research, Joel. I have to say, I don't actually know very much about the detail of the bank's investments and those kind of things. Usually people are calling because they're having trouble with internet banking, but it's really great to hear someone who's so passionate about something. And honestly, I didn't really know that about the gas investments. So thank you. Are you a customer of the bank?
No, I'm not. I'm a member of the general public and have just been wanting to contact you to see what you would say. And firstly, I just want to thank you because I've admitted I'm actually quite a bit nervous doing this call. So to hear you say that you, to hear that reaction is actually really great. So thank you. That's really, really nice. But I'm just wondering if there's a way that you could kind of pass I'm really keen to see NAB create an exit date around gas. I think that, none of the major banks have done that yet. And I'd love to see NAB be on the front foot and be the first to do that. Would it be possible for you to escalate that or pass that message on to perhaps NAB's environmental sustainability team?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can make a log of the call, and all of our issues kind of get marked off on to the required person. Did you need follow up on this?
If it's possible for me to get an email or something, or a call back just with a bit more information, that would be fantastic.
Okay, we'll see what we can do there, but absolutely, I'll record the issue you called about today. And is there anything else you need from me?
No, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for your time today.
No worries. Thanks, Joel.
All right. Thank you very much, Isabella, for being an excellent teller. You weren't quite as nice as the person from Commonwealth Bank today, but I appreciate that because maybe that was a bit of an anomaly. So what do we do next? I'm going to just share my screen and just pop that link again in the chat, which is the page that I've been using as a bit of a guide there. So I'll just share my screen and show you what we do next, because what we want to do is make sure that we capture a bit of the essence of that phone call. So the power of doing this all together is that the fossil fuel industry has stacks of money, and they're able to leverage all sorts of change as a result of having that kind of power and influence via money, right? Our power is in people power. And a really important part of doing this action is the fact that we're doing it together and as a collective. So what we'd love to do is we'd love you to report your call once you've done it. So that's feeding back to us so that we can count how many calls each bank is getting and also capture some of that feedback. So if you could just fill in this very simple form here that's on the page. If you've got any sort of connection to NAB. Now, as you heard, I'm not a customer of NAB and I don't have a connection, so I'm just leaving that blank. And then I'll just write a very quick assessment of response to my request. So I'm going to put in something there that, the person I spoke to was interested in that information, and that I'm going to get an email response from them. So I'm fairly happy with that as a response from NAB there. So you might be wondering then, now what? What happens next? And if you're a customer, or if you're lucky like me, you might get a bit of a follow-up. But the really big, powerful thing that you can do next is to tell your friends and family about this. As I mentioned, we have people power on our side. We can all be agents of change within our own communities and foster that leadership in others around us, invite others to take action with us in this campaign. So the vast majority of Australians care about climate change. They want to see more action from government, from business. This is a really tangible thing that people can do. So we really encourage you to, once you've made your call or calls, tell friends and family about this. Open the conversation with others, going, hey, I did this thing and it was actually really good, and I'm getting some follow-up, or the person on the other end of the phone had something to say about it too. So we really encourage you to build the movement, continue to build the momentum, and reach out to your friends and family as well to invite them to take action.
Thanks so much, Joel and Isab. That was a very entertaining and spot on phone call role play, and there's a bit of praise for you both in the chat, particularly for doing a bit of a role play in front of, we now have about 120 folks on the call, which is a really fantastic audience.
I'm glad you mentioned that now and not before. Thanks, Phoebe.
Yeah, that would have really put the pressure on you. So in just one moment, we're going to go to your questions from the audience, from the community for Joel. But just remember to keep using that Q&A function there to put your question forward. But just before we get to that, Joel, can you tell us a little bit about the email that you've mentioned that ACF will be sending people?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to cascade this out over the next couple of days. So within the next couple of days, you'll receive an email in your inbox that has a link to all the pages for each of the banks, and it will also have this great resource which is the bank rank, and this is a great resource that you can use to share with your friends and family. This has got a lot of that information that May talked about at the beginning of tonight's session about what each bank is doing on gas. So there's a bit of a crosses and ticks assessment of each of the banks here. And then you've got your button down here where you can click and then go to the page that will give you those instructions to call that specific bank. So that email will be in your inbox over the next couple of days. really recommend that you keep an eye out for that, and please make the call on that day so we can spread them out and really start building that momentum and agitating for change within the banks.
Thanks so much, Joel. And there was also, with all of that information that you've just shown us, there was a great suggestion I saw from someone in the chat around taking notes and actually having some written talking points when you make your call. I personally find that really useful to make sure I tick off everything that I want to say when I call the bank or another decision maker. So please make use of those resources. They're there for you.
Absolutely. And be kind to yourself when you're doing this. It is kind of, you know, it's stepping out of the comfort zone for a lot of people. I think some of you might be old hands and just be like, oh, this is easy as, but if it's the first time you're doing something like this, yeah, it's all right if you fumble over things. It's meant to be a conversation. So be a bit prepared, but also, yeah, all the best.
It has a lot of power too when it's clear to the person you're speaking to that you're just another human being wanting them to take action on this issue. So genuine is really valuable with your calls. So now I would like to throw to Isabella again, and Isab will have some questions from the community for Joel.
Thanks, Phoebe. Joel, inspired by the last thing you said there, and also a question from Ashley, obviously you had a really good experience with CommBank today, and you know, I was pretty nice to you from NAB. How do people stay motivated maybe when they have a less positive experience and you know, a kind of fighting a campaign that's not going so well?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think that's part of doing this work, is that we do come up against opposition or resistance, and I think that how do we stay motivated? I think it's drawing upon things like remembering that we're part of a big community that is not only doing this together, but is also building on so many wins that have only been possible because all of us have stood up and taken action at key moments. So I think that there's a bit of resilience that we need to build in ourselves if we do come across someone who's not so pleasant or is not so keen on what we're doing. I would also say that it's, you know, just like when you call a politician's office, regardless of who that politician is or who that staffer is, it's their job to listen to the community. It's their job to take on feedback and pass it on to the relevant party. So I'd say if you're making a call to a bank and you do speak to someone who's not a big fan of what you're talking about, they're still on the other end of the phone. They're getting paid to field your request and make the appropriate action. So in the, I think, unlikely event that you have anyone who's particularly disgruntled about this, I would just kind of take a deep breath and just remind them of what you're doing. It might end up being a bit of a shorter call than you might otherwise have, but it is their responsibility to pass on that and you know, there's so many people that answer the phones in these corporations that you never know. You might call back again and get a totally different person who might be a lot more receptive.
Thanks, Joel, and thanks for that question, Ashley. So I think we have time for two more. So as you answer the first one, just please make sure that you leave enough time to answer the second one. The first is about, there's been a few questions about other different ways that people can take action. So questions about whether a phone call is more influential than a letter, you know, maybe letters to the banks have to get recorded in a certain way. And also from someone, Ian, about visiting branch managers, actually going into the bank to have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of the above, absolutely. I mean, what we have the benefit of doing as a big organisation like ACF is really coordinating moments where there's demonstrations of people power at key times that we can show decision makers like banks, like governments, just how many of us care about these things. Please don't let that take away from any additional things that you want to be doing or are already doing in your community. Going down to the branch and having a conversation with the branch manager is a fantastic way to escalate these issues, particularly if you've got a couple of facts on hand from the BankRank resource. And you know, we all know that a face-to-face conversation is kind of unrivaled in its ability to connect and have an impact. Letters, emails, all a fantastic use of time. The reason that we've chosen to go with calls for this initial launch is so that we do have that one-on-one conversation between staff within the institutions of the bank, so that they can then get escalated higher up in that manner. And it's also, I think, a really great, hopefully a great experience for a broad range of people as well. Something that's accessible maybe for friends and family who might not have taken as much action as you have in campaigns. So yeah, we're focusing on calls at the moment, but there'll be plenty more to come in our phasing over the next couple of months. But yeah, please go forth and let us know how you go with conversations with branch managers, letters, emails, all the above.
Thanks, Joel. And there's also been a few questions that I'm going to try and squish into one about different people's different relationships. So, for example, if they're not a customer of the bank they're calling, as in our role play, maybe if people want to call multiple banks, whether there's different advice for people who are staff of the banks, and if there's kind of pressure they could put from the inside. May, you might like to quickly say something on that as well, and shareholders. So that was a big one, but just the general vibe is different relationships with the banks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will hand over to May in a minute, but I just think absolutely leverage whatever relationship you can. This is another great thing about being part of a huge people power movement, right? Is that each of us are not just all coming together here on this webinar. We're all connected to community and corporations in different ways. So please, if you're a shareholder, absolutely. May, I might hand over to you if you wanted to speak a bit more about it.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really great question. And as Joel said, every person, whether you're a shareholder, customer, employee, or just part of a community or part of the community as a whole, you all have a different influence. If you're an employee, you might want to raise a question to your manager. You might want to have the conversation internally with your colleagues and start that dialogue internally. If you're a customer or a shareholder, asking questions through the call line is a really good way of influencing power, showing the collective strength of the community. As a shareholder as well, there's also other opportunities when it comes to AGM season to vote, to put in questions at the AGM and raise your voice that way. But I just really want to go back to the point about being a community member. Banks really care about what the community think. They have a social license to operate only because of how they are viewed by the community as a whole. So you don't have to be a customer to have influence, because you might be a potential customer, and that's what they want. And you have power and influence no matter who you are in this grand scheme of things. I just really, really, really want to hone that back in. It's really important that we collectively raise our voice in this respect.
Fantastic. Thank you, May. And I think that's a really terrific note for us to wrap this wonderful hour up on. I really hope that everyone listening in has enjoyed this evening, and that you're feeling as excited and energized about this campaign as all of our speakers clearly are. But also, I want to acknowledge that if you're feeling like this was a lot of information for an hour on a Thursday night, that is perfectly fine. We're going to send out all the resources that you need, and I'm just going to do a quick summary for you of what's next. So emails from us, the email from Joel will be sent out from tomorrow onwards. So you may get it tomorrow, or you may get it over the next week, so that we can stagger those calls. Look out for an email from Joel Marlin Tribe in your inbox. It will have all of the instructions and tips that you need to make your call. And please do remember to take the time to report your call back to us once you've done it, so that we can measure our impact. And if there were questions that you had from tonight, or anything else that you need to make your call that we didn't cover, please do send us an email at contactus@acf.org.au. Thank you everyone here for your time tonight. Look out for that email from Joel, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your evening.